this still a normal day at the office?
What does that mean exactly? You think that's what he's trying to do? Why are we learning this now?
Is that weird? Why is this happening? Why is that? Why is that? Why is that? Buckle up, stay with us. Hope you had a good Labor Day weekend. I hope you had the day off. I hope you are tanned, rested, and ready because back at school. Today's day one. Here we go. Former Secretary of State, former Senator, former Democratic presidential nominee, John Kerry is here tonight on this show for the interview. He's going to be here live on set with me. I'm very excited about that. It's always exciting. It's always an almost intimidating privilege to have the opportunity to ask questions of somebody who has been a presidential nominee from a major party, let alone somebody like Secretary Kerry, who was also an immediate past Secretary of State, let alone one with 28 years of experience in the U.S. Senate. So it's always exciting to have the chance to talk with, to ask questions of somebody who has that kind of experience. But after a day in the news like today, man, take your pick of the number of things you'd like to talk to somebody like John Kerry about. So he'll be joining us in just a moment. But even if you just start with the small stuff today, today ended up. Today, what would usually be like relatively small bore news, right? That an indicted sitting congressman and his wife had to appear in federal court today in California to face a federal judge. The judge is going to be hearing a massive corruption case against that sitting congressman. Today was a hearing ahead of that trial. So we've seen members of Congress indicted before in this country. But part of the reason this Duncan Hunter in court today story ends up being a big national news story with ongoing ramifications is because we've never before had a president react to an indictment of a sitting member of Congress the way this president is reacting right now. President Trump this weekend saying publicly that the Attorney General was wrong to have allowed the prosecution of that congressman and another one who was also recently indicted, specifically because both those indicted members of Congress are Republicans. President making the argument that the Republican Party might lose those two seats in the upcoming midterm elections, and therefore the Attorney General shouldn't have allowed those prosecutions to go forward. There's all sorts of norms and policies and supposed third rails, right, in politics and law enforcement that are all designed to avoid even the appearance that the criminal law and the courts have become a tool of one party or the other, or they're being used by the administration in power to go after their political enemies. There's all these norms and rules and policies about avoiding the appearance, avoiding creating even a minor suspicion that law enforcement might be unfairly inflected in that way. This president is just flat out advocating that, yep, that's the way it should be, which sort of renders quaint any other comparatively delicate Nixonian shadings like that in the past. This president just overtly argues that law enforcement ought to be used to punish his political enemies and to reward his political supporters. Today also brought news of a new Bob Woodward book about the current president and his White House. And Bob Woodward has written long, revealing books on 8 modern presidents, and so you might think we've sort of gotten used to what it means to a presidency to have the next Bob Woodward come out, the next Bob Woodward book come out about the serving president. But if today's advance reports on the content of this latest Woodward book are to be believed, it seems like this latest Bob Woodward book is going to be way different than all the others. This sort of seems like maybe this is the kind of science fiction Bob Woodward book, or at least it's the otherworldly Bob Woodward book in which there aren't normal things going wrong in the White House. No, in this White House, the U.S. military is bluntly ignoring and disobeying orders from the U.S. president. No, in this White House, senior advisors to the president steal documents off the president's desk to prevent him from seeing those documents or, God forbid, signing them. In this White House, the president is quoted saying to a high-level meeting about the war in Afghanistan, quote, "You should be killing guys. You don't need a strategy to kill people." In this White House, this president is said by his defense secretary to be, quote, "acting like and having the understanding of a 5th or 6th grader." In this president, the president's chief of staff is reported to have said about the president, quote, "He is an idiot. It's pointless to try to convince him of anything. He has gone off the rails. We are in crazy town. I do not even know why any of us are here." In this White House, the president's potential testimony to the special counsel investigating whether he was elected in part because of his collusion with a foreign influence operation run by Russian military intelligence, that apparently produced a January practice session in which the president and his lawyers on the Russia scandal gamed out how the president might answer questions posed by the special counsel's office in an interview. Now, this is from the Washington Post, which obtained an advance copy of Woodward's book and published an article about it today. Quote, "John Dowd was convinced that President Trump would commit perjury if he talked to special counsel Robert S. Mueller. On January 27th, the president's then personal attorney staged a practice session to try to make his point. In the White House residence, Dowd peppered Trump with questions about the Russia investigation, provoking stumbles, contradictions, and lies until the president eventually lost his cool." Now, fast forward 6 weeks or so, and according to Bob Woodward, or at least according to the Washington Post's account of Woodward's new book, quote, "On March 5th, John Dowd and Jay Sekulow met in special counsel Robert Mueller's office with the special counsel himself and with Mueller's deputy, James Quarles. Thereupon, Dowd and Sekulow reenacted Trump's January practice session. Dowd then explained to Mueller and Quarles why he was trying to keep the president from testifying. Quote, "I'm not going to sit there and let him look like an idiot. And you publish that transcript because everything leaks in Washington. And the guys overseas," I think the implication is leaders overseas, "are going to say, 'I told you he was an idiot. I told you he was a GD dumbbell. What are we dealing with this idiot for?'" According to Woodward, Robert Mueller then replied, quote, "John, I understand." Later that month, the president's lawyer, John Dowd, reportedly told the president, quote, "Do not testify. It is either that or an orange jumpsuit." It's hard to imagine the president in an orange jumpsuit for a lot of different reasons, some aesthetic, some more substantive. But if you want to understand what happened today with the utter chaos in Washington, brought about in that Senate committee room by both protesters and Senate Democrats trying to delay or stop this particular president from making a nomination to the Supreme Court right now, it's worth being cognizant of the fact that this president really is in a legal situation unlike any other president who was in the position to be nominating somebody to the Supreme Court. The orange jumpsuit concern is real. I mean, the president's own legal jeopardy is barreling toward a finale that will almost assuredly rocket through the federal courts and thereby almost assuredly get to the Supreme Court. This president is an unindicted co-conspirator in a federal case that has been brought against his personal lawyer and has already resulted in 8 guilty felony pleas. That same longtime personal lawyer swore in open court, under oath, that it was the president himself who ordered him to commit multiple felonies during the course of the presidential campaign. The president's first national security advisor, his deputy campaign chair, a campaign foreign policy advisor have all pled guilty already to federal felony charges in conjunction with this investigation. We're awaiting a sentencing at the end of this week for the campaign foreign policy advisor who has pled guilty. The jury selection process started literally today for a second federal jury that is going to hear additional felony charges against the president's campaign chair, who was already just found guilty on 8 felony counts and who's about to go on trial for another 7 felony counts. The president's White House counsel has reportedly given over 30 hours of interviews to the special counsel, and he's just announced that he's leaving the administration. The CFO of the president's business, an executive who's been with the president for decades and who worked for the president's father before him, the executive who has apparently authorized every single payment that ever went through the president's business or charitable foundation, the executive who reportedly filled out at least some of the president's tax returns, he has now been granted immunity by federal prosecutors in exchange for his cooperation in their inquiries. As has the head of the National Enquirer, supermarket tabloid, which prosecutors say participated in some of the president's illegal hush money schemes, which have now been charged as federal campaign finance felonies in the Southern District of New York. Also granted immunity, this convicted pedophile, who most recently was the business partner of a major Trump donor and a high-ranking Republican Party official who is now reportedly under investigation by the Public Integrity Section at the U.S. Justice Department for influence peddling. A federal grand jury in Washington this week is continuing to hear testimony that appears to be connected to the president's longtime political consultant, Roger Stone, who is now pleading publicly for help paying his legal bills because he says he's quite sure that he's the next one to be indicted, and soon. Yeah, so it's not like the president has anything to worry about legally, right? I mean, no chance anything related to this president is going to end up like in the courts anytime soon, right? The New York Times reports tonight that the special counsel's office is now negotiating in writing with the president's current legal team about the manner in which they expect to be taking testimony from the president himself in this scandal. And so, yeah, you might expect a little controversy, a little turbulence when a president personally facing this amount of legal jeopardy tries to install, in this context, a new justice on the Supreme Court.
I believe you've repeatedly and enthusiastically embraced an interpretation of presidential power so expansive it could result in a dangerously unaccountable president at the very time when we are most in need of checks and balances.
You are the nominee of President Donald John Trump. This is a president who's shown us consistently that he is contemptuous of the rule of law. And it's that president who's decided you are his man.
You've taken the unorthodox position that presidents should not be burdened with a criminal or civil investigation while in office. This is now we have a president who has declared in the last 24 hours that the Department of Justice shouldn't prosecute Republicans. You know, it's Alice in Wonderland. And I find it difficult to imagine that your views on this subject escape the attention of President Trump, who seems increasingly fixated on his own ballooning legal jeopardy.
What Senator Leahy is talking about there when he says the unorthodox positions of Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh, that presidents shouldn't be burdened with a criminal or civil investigation while in office, what he's saying there is true about Brett Kavanaugh. I mean, Republicans in the Senate have tried to create an image of Judge Kavanaugh as a sort of generic, normal conservative pick for the Supreme Court. But Brett Kavanaugh does swing really, really wide on, of course, the purely hypothetical issue of a president someday, who knows, maybe somehow finding himself or herself in legal jeopardy. He swings really wide on that issue. He does not come across as a cookie-cutter conservative Republican nominee on that issue in particular. On that one, he's an outlier. Even among conservatives, Brett Kavanaugh writing in 2009, quote, "We should not burden a sitting president with civil suits, criminal investigations, or criminal prosecutions. The president's job is difficult enough as it is. The country loses when the president's focus is distracted by the burdens of civil litigation or criminal investigation and possible prosecution." Quote, "Even the lesser burdens of a criminal investigation, including preparing for questioning by criminal investigators, are time-consuming and distracting. Like civil suits, criminal investigations take the president's focus away from his or her responsibilities to the people. And a president who is concerned about an ongoing criminal investigation is almost inevitably going to do a worse job as president." Quote, "The indictment and trial of a sitting president would cripple the federal government. Such an outcome would ill serve the public interest." President Trump's Supreme Court nominee, yes, is expected to be a decisive vote to make abortion illegal, at least in large swaths of the country, by overturning Roe versus Wade. Brett Kavanaugh is expected to be a decisive vote to remove limits on secret money in political campaigns. He's expected to be a potentially decisive vote on a number of issues of racial justice, including his enthusiastic hostility to affirmative action and the Voting Rights Act, and I could keep going. But you know, the basic idea here is clear, and Republicans see all of those things as the plus side for Brett Kavanaugh. That's why they want to confirm him. But you know what? There's a million judges like that they could have picked. A million judges who have all those same positions on those issues, who would actually be more confirmable than Brett Kavanaugh for this seat on the Supreme Court. There's a million conservative Republican judges out there who don't have gazillions of pages of documents from their 5 years serving in the George W. Bush White House dealing with the most controversial issues of that administration. Documents which Republicans will now have to bend over backwards to conceal from scrutiny, thus breaking all their own precedents about how Supreme Court nominees are reviewed. The top Republican in the Senate, Mitch McConnell, is said to have warned the White House explicitly against picking Kavanaugh because he might be difficult to confirm, specifically because of his super long paper trail that Republicans didn't know how they would contend with. Kavanaugh is not the easiest pick for them. He was first nominated to a federal judgeship in 2003. It took the George W. Bush White House 3 freaking years to get him confirmed because he was seen as so controversial and so partisan. And then when he was finally confirmed, there's strong evidence that he misled the Senate at his confirmation hearings and told them something that was not true when they were trying to confirm him for that last job. Republicans could have chosen a gazillion different Brett Kavanaugh-type judges when it comes to policy issues, on which we are quite sure that Brett Kavanaugh will vote as a hardline, uncompromising right-wing justice. But out of all the judges this president could have picked, this president picked the only judge we know of to have been on the president's supposed list of contenders, who, for example, had gone out of his way in a public setting to say that the Supreme Court's unanimous ruling in U.S. v. Nixon might have been wrongly decided. The only nominee who has sketched out a truly unique, even to the point of being strange, view of a president's susceptibility to serious criminal investigations. Brett Kavanaugh is the only one out there that we know who says a president shouldn't even be questioned, let alone indicted or prosecuted. And so, yes, it is a little on the nose that this particular nominee was chosen by a president who is himself the subject of serious criminal investigation right now, while Kavanaugh's confirmation proceedings are underway. And now the senators from the president's party appear ready to pull out all the stops to get this nominee confirmed before the midterm elections in November that will decide the control of Congress. The president signaled in an interview with Bloomberg News last week that as soon as the midterm elections are over, he will move to fire the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions. After the midterm election, we also know from a tape we obtained of Congressman Devin Nunes from the Intelligence Committee and Kathy McMorris Rodgers, who's in the House Republican leadership. We know from the tape we obtained of them speaking at a Republican fundraiser that the House Republican plan after the midterm elections is also to impeach and try to remove from office the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, who directly oversees the Mueller investigation. And he will continue to oversee that investigation unless and until Attorney General Jeff Sessions is replaced in office, which the president says will happen right after the midterms. In order to rush through Kavanaugh's confirmation before the midterm elections, before the midterm elections take place and the White House and Republicans in Congress thereafter make those promised moves to try to throttle the Russia investigation, Republicans in the Senate are trying to ram through this confirmation as quickly as possible. And part of the way they are doing that is by just not allowing a review of Kavanaugh's record. If you saw any of the hearing today, you saw Democrats complaining about not having the paperwork, right? How Brett Kavanaugh's records are being withheld from the committee. They're being withheld from the public. It's an unprecedented way to proceed with the Supreme Court nomination, to not have documents from the nominee's time in public service reviewed by the National Archives and made available to the committee and to the public so they can vet the nomination. I mean, rather than allow the National Archives to review and release Brett Kavanaugh's records on the occasion of his confirmation hearings, Republicans instead, they're really trying to get away with this brand new system they have MacGyvered up for considering Brett Kavanaugh's paper trail as fast as possible, but definitely before the election. This thing that they have invented, this system they have invented for reviewing Kavanaugh's record, the Republican plan, which is why Democrats went so nuts today. The Republican plan really does seem to be that Kavanaugh's records will just be reviewed by an old friend of his, a fellow Republican activist lawyer from the Bush administration, a man named Bill Burke, who also at the same time is representing Steve Bannon, former White House Chief of Staff Reince Priebus, and outgoing White House counsel Don McGahn in the Russia investigation. So Bill Burke is representing 3 crucial Trump-related witnesses in the Russia investigation. And simultaneously, he personally is serving as the gatekeeper on what documents from Brett Kavanaugh's past will be allowed to be seen by the committee and by the Senate before Kavanaugh is put on the Supreme Court. And so, no, things did not look normal today at this committee hearing in Washington. And 70 people were arrested at this hearing today. And they couldn't get 30 seconds into this hearing today before it all started to fall apart, and it was hours delayed. And we've never seen a confirmation hearing quite like this, but there's a reason for that. There's a reason for that. We've never had a nominee like this. It's clear they went out of their way to find this particular nominee, and he's trying, and the president is attempting to put him on the court at a time that the president's own legal jeopardy sets this nomination apart from any other one in U.S. history. So there's a reason why things are going a little nuts today. We've got more ahead tonight, including my interview with John Kerry. Stay with us.
The topics we cover on MSNBC every day, they're driven by big ideas, big themes, huge societal changes. And that's what we talk about on our new podcast. It's called Why Is This Happening?
Why Is This Happening with Chris Hayes. New episodes every Tuesday. The full video podcast is no longer available, but The Rachel Maddow Show still is. Check out the full episode audio podcast or watch the show online anytime at now.msnbc.com.